Okay, let's dive right into this explainer with full energy. Today, we're going to decode the literal action heroes of the English language. You know, if you've ever struggled to make your writing really pop, or if you just find yourself getting totally tangled up in the mechanics of a complex sentence, well, you are absolutely in the right place. Today, we are talking all about verbs.
I absolutely love this quote. Verbs are the action heroes of every sentence. We really need to reframe how we think about verbs. They aren't just, boring vocabulary that you have to memorize for some grammar test. No, they are the powerful engines that get every single sentence moving. Without them, your sentences are basically just parked cars going absolutely nowhere. Verbs show what's happening, they show when it's happening, and they literally bring your ideas to life.
So here is our roadmap for the explainer today. We're going to untangle this rather dense grammar rulebook over the next few minutes by hitting 5 key areas: the engine of sentences, finite versus non-finite verbs, playing the object game with transitivity, exploring the shape-shifting world of ergative verbs, and finally, we'll look at the ultimate rule breakers, the irregulars. All right, let's kick things off with part 1, the engine of sentences. Before we really get into the weeds here, I want to mentally anchor you with the basic verb family tree. Notice the split right at the top of the hierarchy between main verbs and auxiliary verbs. Main verbs provide the core action. They tell us what the subject is actually doing. Auxiliary verbs, on the other hand, well, they kind of sit right next to the main verbs just to assist. They give functional meaning to the clause, like expressing the tense or the mood. Definitely keep this fundamental split in mind as we navigate through the rest of the rules. Moving right along to section 2, finite versus non-finite verbs. So the crucial point here is understanding the contrast between these two. Finite verbs are your engine. They do all the heavy lifting. They show tense, past, present, or future. They show voice, and they have to match the subject. Honestly, for a sentence to be complete, it absolutely needs one of these engines. Then, on the flip side, we have non-finite verbs. I like to think of them like yoga instructors. They're super flexible, calm, and supportive, but they aren't actually leading the sentence themselves. They don't show tense, and they don't change based on the subject at all. They show up as infinitives, like to explore, or gerunds, like swimming, and they act a lot more like nouns or adjectives. And speaking of those assistants, we have a very specific type of helper called modal auxiliary verbs. These are words like must, shall, will, can, and may. Now, what's wild about these is that they never change their form. You are never going to see the word musts or mays, but they attach to another base verb to indicate a subject's mood, their ability, or an obligation. They're exactly what allow us to say you must do the work versus you can do the work. It's a tiny shift, but it creates a totally different meaning. Okay, section 3. This is where we play the object game, also known as transitivity. This is where the mechanics of sentences get really interesting. First up, we have intransitive verbs. These are actions that stand completely alone. They do not need a direct object at all. Take the sentence, the sick child sneezed in my face. Sneezed is the action, and it doesn't transfer over to an object. Now contrast that with transitive verbs. These guys absolutely require a direct object to make any sense, like, my cat kills rabbits. If you were to just walk up to someone and say, my cat kills, your listener is going to be left hanging, waiting for the rest of the sentence. The action literally has to transfer to the rabbits. But wait, it actually gets an upgrade. Enter the ditransitive verb. These are English verbs that are, well, kind of greedy. They take both a direct object and an indirect object. Let's actually see these in action. Maureen gave Dan the pencil. The verb gave hands off the action to the pencil, that's your direct object, but it also impacts Dan, who is the indirect object. Or take a look at this hilarious one. The clown got the children too excited. The action of getting transfers to the children, and it results in the object complement of them being excited. Using these is exactly how you build really rich, multi-layered descriptions in your writing. Now, you might be thinking, oh man, do I have to memorize which verbs belong in which category? Well, actually, scratch that worry, because here is the secret. The vast majority of English verbs are ambitransitive. All that means is they aren't locked into one specific category. They can shift depending entirely on the context. You can say, the store opens early, which is completely intransitive. Or you can say, some man opened the window, which is transitive. The verb itself is exactly the same, but the engine is powering a totally different kind of vehicle.
Which brings us perfectly to section 4, shapeshifters, otherwise known as ergative verbs.
So what on earth is an ergative verb? Basically, it's a very special kind of ambitransitive verb, where its intransitive subject corresponds directly to its transitive direct object. I know that sounds like a mouthful, but linguists often refer to these verbs as having a middle voice, meaning they sit somewhere right in between the active and passive voices. Let's look at how this actually plays out, because it's pretty cool. Take the first sentence. The technician boiled the water. Here, water is the direct object receiving the action, right? But listen to the second sentence. The water boiled. Magically, the direct object of that first sentence has completely transformed into the subject of the second. The focus totally shifts from who caused the action to the action itself. And this distinction right here is exactly why this matters so much for your own writing. Oftentimes, students try to make their academic writing sound super objective by awkwardly forcing the passive voice. They'll write something like, inflation was increased. It just sounds clunky, doesn't it? It implies someone specifically walked into a room and turned up an inflation dial. But increase is an ergative verb. You can simply write inflation increased. It's clean, it's objective, and it focuses entirely on what is happening rather than who is causing it. Dodging that overcorrection will instantly elevate your writing. And finally, we arrive at Section 5, Irregulars, the rule breakers. If regular verbs are the well-behaved machines that just politely add an ed to show the past tense, like play becoming played, irregular verbs are the absolute rebels of the dictionary. There are over 200 of these guys in regular everyday use, and they completely ignore the standard conjugation patterns. Sing becomes sang and then turns into sung, go turns into went, and gone. There is literally no formula here. They simply demand raw, brute force memorization. Because they rely entirely on memorization, they are basically linguistic traps, especially if you are taking any kind of standardized test. Look at these super common mistakes. It's totally correct to say I drank water, but if you were using the past participle, it must be I had drunk enough, not I had drank. There's no way around it. The same thing goes for the cat had sprung, absolutely not the cat had sprang. These are the exact tripwires that can completely ruin exam scores if you aren't paying close attention. And then, we have the most stubborn oddballs of the entire bunch. These are the irregular verbs that absolutely refuse to change their form or their spelling regardless of the tense. Today, I cut the paper. Yesterday, I cut the paper. I have cut the paper. Bet, burst, hit, let, put, set. They are total linguistic anomalies that just sit there, unchanging, doing exactly what they want to do. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this one thought. Verbs really are the driving force of all communication. They can be flexible assistants, powerful engines, wild shapeshifters, and outright rule breakers. So the question is, are you putting the right engines in your sentences, or are you letting the rules break you? Take the time to master these mechanics, and I promise you, your writing will never be the same. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive. Now go out there and build some great sentences.